Hi there, this is Sean, the Honest Book Reviewer, with another book review. In this video we're discussing What Happened to the Bennetts, written by Lisa Scottoline. It's one of the 12 books in GOODREADS' top 12 mystery/thriller books for the first half of 2022. I really can't work out why this is one of the top 12 books. In my opinion, it's not a great book. The start of the book is really good. The hook is really good. Then it kind of slowly falls apart, and the last part of the book, which lasts for about a third of the book, it felt like a really bad action movie. I'm not sure if you recall Charles Bronson movies. That's what it felt like. So basically a Charles Bronson movie was Charles Bronson playing a character where at the start of the movie somebody in his life was murdered, whether a family member or a friend. And then the rest of the movie was about him taking revenge on a whole gang of people. And they were also over the top. One person, walking around just killing people left, right and centre. That's what this book felt like for the last third. And I didn't think it was very well written. I didn't think it was very well thought out and planned. It just felt like a bad action movie. The first section in this book, the first chapter or so, that hook is amazing, and it really dragged me into the story, and I thought this is going to be an amazing book. I was wrong, but that start, when that event happens, when the Bennetts are driving home and their life changes suddenly, when these people try to carjack them, and almost by accident, the daughter Alison is shot in the neck. And they're rushed to hospital, and tragedy happens. Alison ends up dying, and that changes the Bennetts' life forever. That part of the book was just thrilling. It's just very visceral. Everything's described in such vivid detail. The shock of the family when it happens, their emotions, how raw it is. Everything about it just drags you into the story. And even slightly after that, I thought, okay, this book's going to continue on in that vein. It's going to be really high tension, or that suspense is going to happen in the story. These characters are going to be such great characters. But I was just disappointed with what happened with the book after that. It just slowly started to fall to pieces. And a lot of that's driven by Jason, our main character, who's the father in the family. I get the sense that the author wanted to just give us a lot of grief, and that's fair enough because the characters are going to feel grief because the daughter in the family is killed. But the grief was just overpowering everything else. So it's meant to be a thriller book or a mystery book, and I'd say thriller for this one, but the grief was overpowering everything. And so it wasn't a thriller per se after that event. It was more exploration of emotions and became more drama than a thriller. Also, the whole storyline around suddenly them having to go into witness protection. I didn't buy that really at all. That just seemed really odd, and I just felt like that part of the storyline didn't make sense. And that became, the main focus of the storyline after the tragic event. So to have something that doesn't make sense so early on, and to have that as the main part of the storyline for most of the book, it didn't work for me. What this book became was not about anything thrilling per se for most of the book. It became more about what people external to the Bennetts, from their past life before they went into witness protection, what those people were thinking about their disappearance and what they were saying and who was trying to investigate their disappearance. Then suddenly the book takes a dive into action movie territory. So I've got another shift in the story, and this shift is it's very dramatic. There are some high tension moments in there, so that's where we get some tension and some thriller moments happening. But it's just so over the top, and it doesn't make sense in the story that this person, Jason, in who he is in the story, would suddenly become this gun-toting person who's going around and hunting down these people in this gang. It doesn't make sense, and there's certain events that happen in this part of the story that are just too extreme and over the top that you can't suspend belief for them. And in my opinion, it's just not written well. It just felt like a story that the author typed up as she went along. There was no plotting involved, in my opinion. There was no planning. I may be wrong, but that's what it felt like as I was reading this book. It just felt like the author went along and did it, pantsed it. You know, they say riding by the seat of your pants. They pantsed the story rather than plotting it. That's the impression I get. There's one part of this story that I think's a big flaw. So the main character, Jason, is a stenographer. And in the history of the character, he did some work at Gitmo for the military. According to this book, Jason was able to keep and save some of those documents that he typed up for the military on his own personal Dropbox. I can't imagine that ever happening. I can't imagine a private contractor who's hired by the military or any government service being allowed to store any documents on their own personal servers, their own personal files. I don't think that would ever happen in real life. I can't imagine it happening. And I think that's a big flaw in this story, that a lot of the story hinges around that. And I think it's just a huge flaw in the book. And I think it should have been picked up in editing and removed. Jason, the father of the family, look, he's just written to be, I think, the world's best dad. It was coming across as very over the top. Everything about him was a bit hammy. You know, if you saw it on a movie or a TV show, it'd be ham acted. The character was just not believable and so over the top and a bit unfocused as a character, in my opinion. It wasn't consistent as the story went on, and there were just things that didn't add up between what the character is and what the character's doing in the story. So it didn't work for me as a character, and that's a shame because Jason is probably the main character in the story. And if the main character's not working, what's that say about the story overall? Dom, who's one of the FBI agents who's looking after the family in witness protection. Look, I'm not an expert on FBI procedure, but this character didn't come across as a true FBI agent. There are certain things the character does that didn't really fit right with me. I didn't think that's what an FBI agent would really do. I understand it's fiction. You know, the author can add a few things that aren't true into the story, but didn't really sit with me well. Even though I did like the character, for the main part, I did like Dom as a character, just those things about how he acted as an FBI agent and how I didn't think they were lifelike, true, just coloured the character for me a little bit. I didn't really think that's how the character would act in real life. Lucinda, Jason's wife, the mother of the family, at the very start, you're really with her, really engaged with the character, just like you are with Jason at the very start as well. But then as the story goes on, you lose that engagement a little bit, because it feels like a little bit of filler. And to be honest, this character feels very selfish in the book, comes across as very self-centered and very selfish. And I got that strongly as the book went on. And that made me empathize less with Lucinda as the story went on as well. It's very hard to judge the characters in the situation because the situation is so shocking and extreme. But there are certain things about Lucinda that just didn't add up for me. They weren't consistent. And again, I just felt a little bit disengaged with her as the story went on. So not the best character in the book. Overall, not a terrible character. But I think the author just lost her way with how some of these characters are presented in the story. At the start of the book, everything feels so real. The characters, you're really with them, really engaged with them, and you really feel for them. But as the story goes on, as the story loses its way, I just think you disengage with those characters a bit, and you just start to feel like they're not lifelike. You can't empathize with them all the time. They're just not real. On the whole, I didn't like this story. The very start is amazing, and if the whole book was like that, this book would have been a great read. I rate it a 2 out of 5, and I give it a 2 just for the start, because the start was so vivid, so lifelike. Everything felt so real, and you just felt like you were in that scene when it happened. Then it fell apart, and the last bit of the story, those action scenes, were just terrible in my opinion. It felt like a bad 70s, 80s action movie, a Charles Bronson movie. So overall, the book is not a great win in my opinion, and I don't understand how it can be a top-rated book on Goodreads. I do review a lot of thrillers on my channel. If you don't want to miss out on those videos, check out my channel and subscribe. There's also a thriller playlist on my channel. It should be on your screen now.